We understand this disease now. It's a horrible thing, and it shouldn't have been sent, or it shouldn't have happened. Maybe it was sent, and maybe it wasn't. We'll find out. We're going to figure it all out. But it came from China. Shouldn't have happened.
Maybe it was
They
sent.
shouldn't have allowed this to happen. They could have stopped it in China. And they did stop it going into China for the most part, but they didn't stop it. Beijing had a little bit of an outbreak, I understand, recently, but I would view that as somewhat different. They stopped it from going into China, but they didn't stop it from going to the U.S. and the world, and they should have been able to do that.
If you get reelected, sir, would you cut another trade deal with Xi Jinping?
I'll sort of hold that answer in abeyance. I'm not happy. We made a great deal, but the ink wasn't dry when we got hit with the plague, and the plague came in from China, so I'm not happy.
The enactment and imposition of this national security law constitutes a clear and serious breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. It violates Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy and is in direct conflict with Hong Kong basic law. The law also threatens the freedoms and rights protected by the Joint Declaration. We made clear, Mr. Speaker, that if China continued down this path, we would introduce a new route for those with British national overseas status to enter the UK, granting them limited leave to remain, with the ability to live and work in the UK and thereafter to apply for citizenship, and that is precisely what we will do now.
We're also continuing to take action to build on President Trump's signing of the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act. Today, the United States Department of State, along with Treasury, Commerce, and DHS, are issuing a business advisory to companies with supply chain links to entities complicit in forced labor and other human rights abuses in Xinjiang and throughout China. CEOs should read this notice closely and be aware of the reputational, economic, and legal risks of supporting such assaults on human dignity. I want to call attention to recent credible and deeply disturbing new reports that the Chinese Communist Party is imposing forced sterilization and abortions on Uyghurs and other minorities in Western China. This shocking news is, sadly, consistent with the CCP's decades-long callous disregard for the sanctity of human life. I call on all nations, women's advocates, religious groups, and human rights organizations to stand up for the Chinese people's basic human dignity. If the Chinese Communist Party's brutality affects the rest of the world too, we welcome India's ban on certain mobile apps that can serve as appendages of the CCP's surveillance state. India's clean app approach will boost India's sovereignty. It will also boost India's integrity and national security, as the Indian government itself has stated. Today, Canada's National Day celebrations are dimmed by the CCP's recent decision to bring trumped-up espionage charges against Michael Korvig and Michael Spavor. The CCP's propagandists have implied that these two Canadian citizens are hostages held in retaliation for Canada's lawful arrest of Huawei's executive. She is charged by the Department of Justice with bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit bank and wire fraud. I commend the Canadian government for standing firm and backing their independent legal system. Hostage-taking for political gains puts China in league with the Irans and Venezuelas of the world.
China has passed the national security law, so how far is the U.S. willing to go? And are you willing to take mandatory sanctions laid out in the Hong Kong Autonomy Act?
Well, if they're mandatory, we'll do it. We always comply with the law here at the State Department. That's what we do. We will absolutely implement those laws, both consistent with the letter and the spirit of what those statutes require. So we will certainly do that. And there is more work to do for sure. But in the end, General Secretary Xi gets to make the decision about whether he wants to move his nation closer to something that is disconnected from the world in the most fundamental ways. They talk about, when I was in Honolulu, they talk about wanting to be good stewards, international players that comply with multilateral obligations. But when you're violating citizens' most fundamental freedoms, we should look to your actions, not to your words. And so that's what we will continue to do. We'll continue to do all the things that we can. And importantly, we will continue to build out a global coalition that understands the challenge that the Chinese Communist Party threat places on freedom-loving peoples all across the world. This isn't a U.S.-China challenge. This is a challenge that is between freedom and authoritarianism. And so long as we keep that foremost in our minds, I'm confident that the freedom-loving peoples of the world will prevail.
You called it now, after the security law was imposed, just another city subjected to the CCP's whims. Is Hong Kong lost? And how far is this administration willing to go to try to prevent that, or to try to bring a situation back to where it once was?
Well, whether it's lost or not is entirely dependent upon the decisions that General Secretary Xi makes. And when you say lost, you mean has it lost its freedoms? Is it no longer an autonomous place? I signed a certification a couple of weeks back now that suggested that it was not. I suppose these things are always reversible. The actions of the last 48 hours suggest that the Chinese government, at least at this point, the Chinese Communist Party has no intention of reversing that trend. And as for how far we'll go, I'll just repeat what the president said. He wants to ensure, with a handful of exceptions, that Hong Kong is treated just like mainland China, because that's the way that General Secretary Xi has chosen to treat that place as well.
The overwhelming weight of the evidence was suggested that Huawei and ZTE would be national security threats. And that's why we moved forward today with a firm designation to plant a flag to say that going forward, starting on July 1st, tomorrow, that USF funding overseen by the FCC, will not be allowed to be used by U.S. telecom carriers on equipment or services from these two companies, which do present a national security threat to the United States.
So Huawei and ZTE are being barred as well, then, from access to the backbone of the internet, to our basic telecommunications infrastructure. Is that correct?
That's correct. What we found was that these two companies, Huawei and ZTE, had ties to the Chinese Communist Party, had ties to the Chinese military apparatus, the People's Liberation Army. And in addition to that, they are obligated under Chinese law. If they get a request from the Chinese secret police, the intelligence services, they must comply with it, and they are prohibited from disclosing the fact of that request to any of their customers. So especially if you're talking about small rural carriers in the United States, it's not a risk that we believe is worth taking. That could allow for all kinds of intrusion, the installation of backdoors, the infection of our networks with malware, the theft of intellectual property. There are all kinds of risks that are simply not worth taking here in the United States, and I would argue elsewhere in the world.
In terms of the rest of the world, Ajit, where does Europe stand? Where do our allies in the Pacific and Asia stand?
Based on my own personal conversations with some of my foreign counterparts, we've gotten a good response from many of our allies around the world. I've talked to folks from South America, Europe, and Asia, and I think that those conversations are starting to have traction. Recently, Singapore, for example, took a step with one of its major carriers to limit Huawei installation of 5G equipment. Just yesterday, the Indian government banned 59 Chinese-based mobile apps, including companies like TikTok, from their networks altogether. I think there's a growing recognition around the world that the Chinese Communist Party presents a unique threat to communications networks. And here in the United States, we are sending a signal that we are not going to be able to tolerate that threat any longer.
How does it appear that we lost the battle for the human mind?
Well, I think, having been a product of our university system and, been the object of essentially scorn for having different views and essentially self-silenced, I think what you have is one particular viewpoint that predominates in the education system. Let's not forget that you have over 100 Confucius institutes in that education system that are promoting, essentially Chinese Communist Party Marxism in our midst. And, in addition, we have 500,000 Chinese students who are fervent supporters of Marxism because that's all they've been taught, essentially indoctrinated for their entire lives. So it is part and parcel to globalization and the internet, because what the Chinese Communist Party figured out in 1989 after the Tiananmen massacre, that if you could take the openness of the West, you could shield yourself off from those ideas of rule of law and democratic principles and civil liberties and free trade, and you could create a bastion from behind which you launched attacks into democracies themselves, then you could create a situation where a militarily weaker power could overcome a militarily stronger power. And that was what the two PLA colonels wrote in Unrestricted Warfare, and how, quite frankly and successfully, the Chinese Communist Party have executed this strategy that leads us not to a coronavirus pandemic, but also the subsequent looting and rioting, supported by 40% of the tweets just in the coronavirus outbreak alone. You know, the social media posts are from bots. So, you know, they've used all the levers of the state now to really enable and really accelerate the demise of democracies around the globe.
就是香港问题啊，大概37%的人有考虑移民国外，你们不介意他们去国外移民吗？
我不知道你的问题是什么意思。中国来去自由，来去自由。
Given the new security laws that have been laid out by Beijing in Hong Kong, and of course to the move now by
现在是出万达都排上长队了，都排上长队，就是现在出不去了。现在。
哎呦，朋友们呐，看一下吧，欢迎你们啊！这是啥呀？概念蚂蚱呀，吓死！
1块钱一斤，10年后的今天，玉米还是1块钱一斤。我们农民辛辛苦苦一辈子，养活了农药厂，养活了化肥厂，养活了种子厂，养活了全国人民，到最后却难养活我们自己。 我哋真係淨係唔會亂捉你嘅。我哋諗住走，我哋諗住走出嚟。等下先生，唔好越講你紅線啊！我唔會越得，不知幾尊重你哋啊！但係你哋唔得我哋會了解嘅，等等，我啲同事會慢慢了解，好唔好？大佬。CCP lie! Americans lie! Americans lie! CCP lie! CCP lie! Americans lie! CCP lie! CCP lie! Americans lie! Americans lie! Take down CCP! 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 Take down CCP!
这是一个曾经的国家队队员，是吧？跟你们讲病毒的一个事情。王霜，国家女足啊，现在的这个主力前锋啊，王霜，她就是武汉人，湖北武汉人啊。当时的国家女足在武汉集训，在1月20号那天，大家一看， 哇，不行啊，严重了疫情，得赶快走。他们不走就都在捂在里面了，你哪儿去不了了？他怕下一步有比赛啊什么的，走不了。1月20号这一天，忽然就是全部大家走了，但是呢，王双因为是武汉人，他就先留在了武汉。他说我不能走，我去哪儿？正好你们都回家了嘛，也都各回各家，类似这解散先。那么他就留在武汉。下半夜4、5点钟，他忽然接个电话，领导叫他，你赶快开车走吧，别待在武汉了。说我操，他说我往哪儿走？我家在这儿，我开着车，我不能满大世界溜达呀，是我去哪儿去啊
？Hello， 大家好，我是王双。1月10多号还未封城的时候，我们当时国家队还在武汉塔子湖参加集中训练备战奥运会。病毒越来越严重以后，18、19这2天的训练，我们当时感觉在场上就感觉都不能够呼吸了，感觉还是有点害怕的。一直到20号左右，我们才说是原地解散。其实当时1月23号封城的半夜我记得是凌晨4、5点左右，我们领导给我打电话说让我赶紧起床，赶紧开着车子，赶紧出去。我当时说啊，我说去哪呀？我说开着车能去哪呀？这逃到哪也不行啊，也没有地方就是认识的亲戚朋友在外地，难道一直开着车流浪吗？
你说是，这不是我说，也不是你说，这是王双说的啊。他们早就知道，他不知道1月20号那天怎么国家女足就从武汉全走了，对吧？怎么1月23号那天下半夜4、5点钟，下半夜呀4、5点钟啊给他打的电话，这是王双自己说的。